You've been learning Mandarin for a few months or maybe even a few years now, and in this initial period you've felt like you've made some rapid progress, you've really been enjoying the process, and then all of a sudden you just feel that you're not making any progress anymore. It's like going up a hill that just feels way too steep that you're never going to be able to reach the top of, and that is probably the intermediate plateau. And in this video I'm going to be sharing 4 hacks that will help you break free from the grips of the intermediate plateau. Let's get started. First of all, we need to realise that the intermediate plateau is simply a psychological hurdle. It's an illusion. Now, in our native languages, we have this perception that we understand absolutely everything. And to be honest, that's actually not the case. So if we have a look at our native language, for example, when you're watching TV, if you put on the cricket and you happen to know nothing about cricket, you might not really understand what the presenter is saying and end up flicking the channel onto something different, let's say onto knitting. And then quickly you realise that knitting is quite boring too for you personally, and you change the channel again onto a drama that you're really enjoying. Now what you can see here is actually it might have been the case that for knitting and cricket you simply don't have the vocabulary or the knowledge of that area and the language associated with it in order to understand it to the point where it would be interesting for you to watch. And sometimes we transfer this expectation from being able to understand everything in our native language, which as I've just demonstrated isn't always the case, onto the same when we're learning Mandarin. And what this can lead to is this psychological hurdle, this illusion that you're not really getting anywhere because you don't understand as much as you think you should. But it may just be the case you don't really know much about knitting in English. So in Mandarin, should you really expect yourself to be able to understand everything about knitting? And I would argue the answer to that would be no. And this leads nicely onto the second hack, which is to narrow your focus. Now, I think when we're learning languages, it's really important to learn vocabulary that's very specific to your interests once you've got a base foundation of vocabulary. So no one's going to argue that the first few thousand words that are really, really common and make up 90% of the language shouldn't be learned. These absolutely should be learned. But then from there on, I think it becomes very efficient in order to become really fluent at things that you're really interested in, that you need to speak about a lot. So for example, I'm going to be doing a PhD soon, and there's a lot of vocabulary associated with that PhD, for example the word for stem cells, which the average person when they're speaking Mandarin with their friends isn't going to need to know. But when my friends speak to me about my PhD and ask me about what it's like, it would be very frustrating and embarrassing for me if I wasn't able to express it well in Mandarin too. So therefore, for me personally, I feel it necessary to learn some medical vocabulary that is very specific to me in order to express my ideas on that topic with friends. So when you're learning Mandarin, after you've got that base in the language, you've reached an intermediate level, try and follow your interests in what you're doing and try and learn vocabulary and get good at speaking about things that really matter to you. And this way you'll also get a lot more enjoyment out of learning the language and having conversations. And if you want to know a bit more about this topic, I've actually done a video on it before where I introduced the concept of microfluency, which is this idea of getting fluent in small areas and branching out gradually. And you can watch that video. I'll leave a link to it somewhere around here. Hack number 3 is to chunk useful phrases and patterns. So to learn the language through a method, a theory of language acquisition, which is known as the lexical approach. Now what this involves doing is taking example sentences and learning them for various really common patterns and really common phrases in the language. As when we're speaking our native language, you'll probably find that you actually tend to think in phrases, in groups of words, as opposed to individual vocabulary. And a lot of people make the mistake, which could to some extent lead to the intermediate plateau, of just learning individual words as opposed to whole phrases and sentence starters and patterns, of which there are loads in Mandarin. And this is actually a really big advantage of learning Mandarin, in that there are so many of these patterns that can be easily interchanged in order to express thousands of ideas from learning a relatively few number of patterns. And you can do this by taking example sentences for these from input that you enjoy, or from textbooks, or from your conversation practice or tutors, and then putting them into Anki to review them and then trying to use them in real life conversation. So I want you to imagine for a second that you spent loads of time memorizing a few hundred common vocabulary items on their own in isolation and the translations in Mandarin. one of the problems you're probably going to face is, having learnt all of these, you're still not able to form a coherent sentence that would make sense and be grammatically correct in Mandarin. Now, what if instead of doing this, you spend the time to master 50 common sentence structures in Mandarin Chinese? And what you could end up doing with those is, you wouldn't only be able to form a few coherent sentences, you'd be able to use these basic sentence patterns in order to express possibly thousands of ideas in the language. And this is really clear as to how efficient this is actually being if you use this method of learning phrases and sentence patterns. Final hack that I want to share in this video is going to sound a bit brutal, but it's actually to sort out your pronunciation. So the sad truth is, a lot of intermediate learners don't have particularly good pronunciation in Mandarin, and what this does is it actually leads to a decrease in the level that's perceived by the Chinese native speakers that you're speaking to, and therefore resulting in yourself not really having too much confidence in your own Mandarin. So one of the things you can do to sort this out is improve your pronunciation. This will greatly increase the way that native speakers perceive your level of Mandarin and make them more willing to have a conversation with you. It's less taxing for them if your pronunciation is a bit closer to native and able to be understood more easily. Now, I think the most important aspect of pronunciation that we probably need to consider in this case is tones, as most people get these wrong, and this can mean that it can be very difficult for native speakers to understand you, as tones really can drastically change the meaning of what you're trying to express and can leave native speakers guessing, which is obviously not what we want to be happening. So as most of you will know, as I've done previous videos on this, that most Chinese vocabulary exists in the form of tone pairs, so 2 or more characters, mainly 2 characters. And what you can do in order to help you improve your tones is to actually learn the 20 tone pairs and really practice them until you can get them right. And I would really recommend getting a native speaker and their feedback in order to help you do this. So that's it for today's video, guys. Thank you so much for watching here. I'd just like to remind you, if you aren't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you can get updated on my latest videos. I really hope these hacks have helped you, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments below about what you're doing in order to overcome the intermediate plateau. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching the video. If you want to learn how to speak fluent Chinese but you aren't too sure how to go about it, you might want to go and check out my free newsletter on peakmandarin.com. Run by me and my friend Misha, the Peak Mandarin newsletter offers practical tips and techniques to solve all your biggest Mandarin speaking problems. It's based on what we did to become fluent in the language and what we wish our teachers had told us at a lower level. Subscribe now and we'll also send you a free copy of our 50-page ebook telling the story of exactly how we taught ourselves to speak fluent Chinese while working and studying full-time in the UK. If you're interested, you can sign up on peakmandarin.com or click the link in the description below. Bye for now.